Hey everybody, I just want to continue on with my reassessment of Disney Star Wars. And, as we near the release of Mandalorian and Grogu, and Starfighter seems to be well into production and doing well, and another half a dozen other Star Wars theatrical projects in the mix that may or may not come out, I feel it's probably a good idea to reassess these things and see exactly, how well have these actually aged, as well as how much of the hate towards some of these projects were even really valid. How much of it was us being, as Star Wars fan, just barraged with a bunch of rage bait that made things come off worse than they were and tainted our view of it. And, last video, I kind of went over the sequel trilogy and how parts 1 and 2 of it are actually really good, and it's tanked by the third one where they were reacting to the rage bait. So let's get into The Acolyte, the proverbial black sheep of the Star Wars family at this point. In my initial review, I gave it a 2.5, just kind of in the middle. Not great, but not as terrible as people made it out to be. But even that, I am adult enough to look at myself and say that, yeah, some of that was colored by the fact that people were making, like even trying to avoid the rage bait, you couldn't avoid it. It was still all over Twitter. It was still all over Facebook. It was still everywhere, just constantly roasting every little thing in that show. But, having basically left Twitter and kind of turned down the noise on a lot of that stuff, I thought back on the show as a whole. And is it really that bad? And I would have to say, if I was reviewing it today, separated out from all the noise, I would probably give it closer to a 3.5. And here's why. Addressing the negatives of it, there's really only a couple of very negative points. One, the pacing is screwed up by the flashbacks. Leslie Headland was very clear that she was using Rashomon from Akira Kurosawa as a basis and structure of the show. Now, that structure works well in a movie, or it works in a singular episode. There's a lot of, Law and Order, NCIS, that do these kind of stories, where you're telling the story of a crime or a situation from two different perspectives, and you're jumping back and forth between both. And it works in that kind of structure because you're paced through it. The problem with doing it in a singular story spread across a number of episodes is the fact that unless you're letting people binge the entire thing, you're basically screwing up your pacing, because you start with episodes that are building and building and building towards something, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're jumping back. And now you've completely taken the momentum and killed it. So that's a mistake right there. Now, is the content itself worse overall? No, it just screws up the pacing. The next mistake is the fact that there were a couple of choices made in the directing department that ruined some performances, namely the ending when Osha is choking out Saul. This should be a moment filled with rage, anger. This is somebody giving in to their hate, and she's just kind of standing there. Now, that is a director choice, and I said that as much as in my original review. But overall, does that hurt the entire piece? No. It just makes that one scene just hit a little softer than it should. But overall, this is coming off of a big fight that is cool. It's got a lot of cool stuff in it. So it just kind of gives it a softer landing than it should. The other thing that makes it, that was big, the biggest complaint was the cringiness of the chant. And we all know what it is. I'm not going to go through it. You know the chant. Now, this could have worked with a simple change. Change it to the Sith language. That would have made things much stronger across a couple different ways. One, it takes the cringiness out of it, because a lot of times with stuff like that, if you throw it into a different language, it actually lands a lot better. You put it in the Sith language, it works by cutting down the cringe, even with the subtitles being the same. But it also works in a contextual sense, because we know that these witches manipulate the Force freely, both sides of it, light and dark. They aren't light side users, they aren't dark side users, they use all of it. And so using that adds to the scene both contextually and cutting down the cringe. And, you know, if you have the Jedi coming up and they're hearing the Sith language, then that really gives better motivation for why they're interfering so much. Gives them a reason why. So, you know, you have these kind of things, and, you know, there's nitpicky things that really most fans probably didn't even think about until they were beat over the head with it, like Ki-Adi-Mundi. Like, I'm a pretty big Star Wars fan. Have been all my life. I didn't know when Ki-Adi-Mundi was born, because I'm not going out on Wikipedia and looking these things up. From my understanding, Ki-Adi-Mundi's age was mentioned in like a CD-ROM and a trading card. And most fans wouldn't have even known any of the context around that had they not been brained with it by rage baiters constantly throwing outrage around the fact that this one character showed up in one scene to be wrong again. I think that we're well aware that Ki-Adi-Mundi is wrong about everything, and he's pompous about it. We know this. We know this from the prequels, because we've seen that the Sith are indeed back, and he's still like, no, you're full of it. So we know that him being wrong again, you know, 50 to 100 years prior, isn't that much of a stretch. Now let's move on from these couple of negatives and get into why The Acolyte is actually a much better show than what we were kind of brute forced into thinking it was. Because really the ideas there are very much in line, especially with what George Lucas was doing in the prequels. This is about the start of the just kind of fall of the Jedi. They are at their peak. They are replete with hubris. They're already starting to cover things up through the show. There are people in the Senate who are very skeptical of the Jedi because they have this habit of just kind of keeping things in-house and no, we'll deal with this. So you already kind of have these cracks in the armor of the Jedi in regards to how the Republic views them. And that's a very George Lucas thing. It has some really amazing lightsaber fights. Overall, the ideas and things line up very well with George Lucas's prequels. You have things being brought in from the EU, like cortosis. You have, and you know, while I generally hate cliffhanger endings, especially when a second season hasn't been greenlit, you know, you have that tease of Plagueis. We were going somewhere interesting. You have the continuing cover-up going on. Like, there's interesting stuff being set up for a second season. The overall story is good. The only other thing you can really point to as an overall weakness is the fact that the switcheroo at the end with Osha being the one to fully fall to the dark side, is just kind of weak storytelling in general. But it doesn't hurt the overall thing. It's just something that you could pick out from a mile away. But that's why I'm not giving it a 5 out of 5 in my reassessment. I'm giving it a 3.5. It's a solid start and could have led to a season that could be a 4 or a 5 out of 5. But we won't get that because we all kind of fell for the noise that the rage bait made. It was almost overwhelming. So I would look back at that and I would say, maybe it wasn't as bad. And especially when you think about other shows that struggled in their first season, that became beloved. Star Trek The Next Generation has a notoriously iffy first season. Could you imagine if the structure we had today around TV shows existed back then? We wouldn't have got a second season of Star Trek The Next Generation. Some of the most classic Star Trek came out of that. And we wouldn't have gotten any of it if the structure today existed back then. Because I'll say it again, The Acolyte isn't that bad. Is it perfect? No. But in thinking back on it, it's not even as bad as I thought it was. And I thought I was trying to be fair, but there's just stuff that, because you could not get away from the noise around it and how loud the rage bait was, it even tainted my view of the show. Because like I said, there's really only a couple of things that tear it down. And 2 of those things are structural. It's not even the content there. It's just a couple of just director choices that undercut it. I mean, even really the chant is a director choice to have that in English instead of in some other alien language. But none of those things are enough to completely torpedo the show to say it is terrible and awful and there's nothing good about it. There's a lot of good there. And that good could have led to something better. So I would say, give it a rewatch and let me know in the comments below what you think in your own reassessment of The Acolyte. But I think we all might be good to give it another watch, give it some views. Maybe it can pump up enough views to get that second season where we really delved into Plagueis. Who knows? Not going to count on it, but you never know. Anyway, give us a like, a share, comment below, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next video.